Hello everybody, my name is Happy and I'd like to welcome you to my History Reaction channel. Today we'll be continuing with the Cuban Missile Crisis, Part 3 by Extra History. This particular episode is Black Saturday. As always, I will include a link to the original content down in the description below. Please consider heading over to Extra History and showing them some support for all the hard work they do on these videos. With that said, let's just get into this and see where our Cuban Missile Crisis takes us next.
October 27th, 3:35 a.m.
All right.
The bomber lets go. A flash lights the Arctic Circle. Shockwaves tear outward with the power of 20 Hiroshima bombs.
Wow.
Radioactive ash collects on the barren island below. A Soviet atmospheric test scheduled before the crisis. In Cuba, Soviet troops are transporting warheads to the missile sites. They and the American troops in Florida are prepared for an invasion. At the quarantine line, Soviet subs play cat and mouse with American destroyers. At noon, America conducts its own test. A mushroom cloud rises 60,000 feet over the Pacific. Thus dawns Black Saturday, the day mankind came closest to nuclear destruction. The clock sits at 11:59.
It's getting close.
This Cold War series is brought to you by Dominations.
All right.
If you want to get your Khrushchev on, check out the link in the description. 11:59 a.m. A U-2 pilot searches the horizon. He had taken off 8 hours before to collect air samples from the Soviet atmospheric test. But this close to magnetic north, all navigation is celestial, and the northern lights have wiped the sky clean. He has had to guess his way back to Alaska, and something about the ground below looks off somehow.
Yeah.
Little does he know, Soviet jets lurk 15,000 feet below him, ready to strike when he descends. He's just flown into the Soviet Union. At the White House, XCOM is at the end of their rope.
That's a part of the Cuban Missile Crisis that I don't hear talked about enough. It's just one of the many incidents during this period that puts us so close to a war. It's just amazing we didn't end up in war. And like them or hate them, I don't think we can ever give Kennedy and Khrushchev enough credit for getting us through this mess in one piece.
They'd nearly agreed to accept Khrushchev's deal, pledging never to invade Cuba in exchange for Russia dismantling the missiles. But 2 hours ago, Radio Moscow broadcast a new deal. Khrushchev also wants US missiles withdrawn from Turkey. The new Soviet position is tough because it's so reasonable.
Yes.
Missiles for missiles. It would go down well at the UN. Kennedy leans toward accepting. The missiles are obsolete and due for withdrawal anyway. But the Hawks revolt. This will break NATO. It's trading away an ally's safety for our own. Rival factions in XCOM begin drafting their own responses to the offer. Meanwhile, the generals are preparing for air sorties in Cuba, starting Monday. Kennedy convinces them to delay until Tuesday, but time for diplomacy is running out. Then, they hear that a U-2 is overdue from Cuba. At 1 p.m., generals are rushing to put the U.S. nuclear force on full alert. In the event of war, they need everything ready, even if it means cutting corners. Nuclear weapons are supposed to work on the buddy system, where no one man is able to fire. But in the chaos, that's waived. Single-seat jets are equipped with tactical nukes. To get the new Minuteman missiles online, commanders jury-rig a solution that bypasses safety protocols. If an error occurs, the Minutemen will launch within 30 seconds. At 2:25 p.m., the lost U-2 pilot, out of fuel, finally glides into a rural airstrip in Alaska. For 2 hours, a navigator has been carefully guiding him in by radio. Only then does he learn that his excursion over the USSR lit up every Soviet air defense system in the sector. MiGs hunted him the whole time, thinking he was preparing for a bombing run. His legs give out. At 4:20 p.m., XCOM is I
feel bad for that poor pilot. And yeah, he did have to get talked home by folks in Alaska. That was a very near miss as well.
Beginning to question everything. Why did Khrushchev offer 2 deals in 24 hours? In fact, how do they know they're negotiating with Khrushchev at all? The tones of the messages were pretty different. What if there was a coup and the Red Army has taken over? They're going in circles now. Then they hear the news. The overdue U-2 isn't coming back. The Soviets shot it down. Escalation. At 5:50 p.m.,
Although I could argue that it was escalation on the U.S. part because they had been warned if they didn't stop the flyovers, they'd get shot down.
Khrushchev phones his family. A car is coming to pick them up. They're going to the vacation house. Don't ask questions. The U-2 shootdown has shaken him to his core. Who ordered it? He'd told Soviet troops to defend themselves, not fire on unarmed planes. And Castro had sent that crazy letter urging a first strike on the United States. Were Soviet troops now following Cuban orders? And if so, would the next unauthorized launch be nuclear? He gets a report. A U-2 violated Soviet airspace. Kennedy is pushing this too far. It's 6:30 p.m. For 2 days, an American destroyer has played cat and mouse with a Soviet sub, and now they've finally caught it.
This is where it gets so close. It just gives me chills even thinking about it. This could have gone so wrong.
For a half hour, they've signaled it with grenades. No response. Now it's time to roll out something bigger. Practice depth charges. Moscow knew that the U.S. Navy would use this signal, but no one told the submarine crews.
Exactly.
Below, the captain of the B-59 is going mad. The sub's cooling system is broken. It's 130 degrees in there. Drained batteries force the crew to live in the dark. Unable to surface while being pursued, they haven't talked to Moscow in 48 hours. They have no idea if there's a war on. And the grenades. It sounds like someone beating the hull with a sledgehammer.
Exactly. Put yourself in the shoes of these Soviet submariners here. They're unable to communicate with anybody outside. They're in the dark. They're cooking to death. There's explosions going on outside. They have no idea if a war is broken out or not. And things are just getting tenser and tenser. This is so close to disaster. One single man averts it, and that man deserves every medal in the world.
And then, wham! That was a depth charge. The war has started. There's no other explanation. The captain gives the order. Load the nuclear torpedo. If his crew's gonna perish, they're gonna take the American fleet with them. At 7:30 p.m., XCOM has outlived its usefulness. Kennedy withdraws with a small corps of advisors to try and figure out how to accept the missile swap while still preserving NATO. And they've got a plan. First, they'll send a public letter agreeing to Khrushchev's first offer. The U.S. will never invade Cuba. Bobby will deliver that letter to the Soviet ambassador, along with a second secret offer. Half an hour later, the ambassador is shocked at Kennedy's demeanor. Bobby has always been eager to pick fights, but now he's empty of bluster. Time is of the essence, Kennedy says. The military wants retribution for the U-2. We can accept the non-invasion pledge publicly, but we can't make an open trade for the Turkish missiles. But take the deal, he says, and the missiles will be gone in 5 months.
Right.
And by the way, if this conversation leaks, the deal's off.
Yeah, so the basic plan was that we would openly agree to not invading Cuba. We would remove the missiles in Turkey, but we would do it later and quietly so it didn't appear that we were giving in to the Soviets on that. It was purely an optical thing, but it was a critical political move, not just for the local politics, but for international politics.
The ambassador leaves at a run. It's 9:52 p.m. Wham! Another depth charge. It's now or never. They are going to vaporize as much of the American Navy as they can. Normally, 2 men have to agree to fire B-59's nuclear torpedo, the captain and the political officer. They have both voted yes. But aboard this submarine is a third man, the flotilla commander Vasili Arkhipov, and he also gets a vote. Wham! An argument breaks out on deck. Arkhipov votes no. Wham!
Yep.
They need to surface and get orders from Moscow. It might end their careers, but it might also save the world. The captain calms, his moment of fury passing. It will be good, at least, to breathe fresh air again. B-59 surfaces surrounded
We owe Arkhipov so much.
by 4 American destroyers. Its ragged crew, which has traveled further than any Soviet sub in history, defiantly unveils the red banner of the Soviet Union. October 28th. It's morning in Moscow. Khrushchev has moved the Presidium to a vacation house outside the city. He can tell they are judging him for creating this mess. Reports are coming in fast. The KGB swears war is imminent. He's still trying to figure out who ordered Soviet troops to shoot down that U-2, and to decipher what message Kennedy was trying to send with the airspace violation. Then, Robert Kennedy's deal arrives. Khrushchev reads it out. The Presidium approves. Diplomats rush to cobble together a message, while Khrushchev composes a letter trying to calm Castro. Russian police halt all traffic as a car rushes the announcement to Radio Moscow. Things are developing so quickly, they're worried war could break out on the car ride. A broadcast goes out. The missiles are leaving, and the crisis is over. XCOM celebrates. Castro trashes his office. Khrushchev finally gets some sleep. Leaders had begun the crisis thinking of politics as a chessboard, a game of moves and counter-moves. But by the end, they realized almost too late that they weren't moving chess pieces. They were throwing dice. They could place bets, but it was luck as much as skill that kept them from war.
Absolutely. So many things did go wrong that could have been much, much worse. And so many things could have gone wrong that didn't. It was a lot of luck involved.
A recon photo finding a missile, a U-2 straying into enemy territory, a submarine officer voting no. The crisis was over, but the gambling would continue, even as, one by one, these men who saved the world were removed from it. While the US's non-invasion pledge secured Castro's hold on power, his volatility during the crisis marginalized him with his Soviet allies. Cuba would never again wield such influence on the world stage. Kennedy helped cool US-Soviet relations. He negotiated a test ban treaty and established a hotline so that the president could talk with the Soviet premier directly without delay.
Good idea.
He was starting to plan a new meeting with Khrushchev in 1963 when he stepped off Air Force One in Dallas. Kennedy would be carried back aboard that plane. In his absence, a dangerous myth grew. Most of XCOM never knew about the missile swap. They thought iron-willed diplomacy backed by military force had won the day, and if it worked with the mighty Soviet Union, mightn't it work on a small country like Vietnam? In 1964, the Presidium ousted Khrushchev, citing his poor decisions, including the missile deployment. He retired to write his memoirs, an old man with no influence.
Those are good memoirs, by the way. If you haven't read them, they're actually worth reading. They're a really interesting insight into Khrushchev.
The new leadership immediately began turning out long-range missiles to compete with the U.S. arsenal. Robert Kennedy wrote a book about the crisis. He served in the Senate and ran for president in 1968. He supported de-escalating the Cold War, especially in Vietnam. After winning the California primary, he stopped to shake hands with a hotel employee who'd brought meals up to his room. An assassin shot him 3 times. The handshake turned into an embrace. The young man kept Kennedy's head off the floor and put a rosary in his hand. "Is everybody okay?" Kennedy asked. One of his eyes closed. His leg was twitching. He tried to comfort the man who held him. "Everything's going to be okay." The Cold War continued for another 23 years. As of 2018, the clock is at 2 minutes to midnight.
Yep. Okay, really well done. I'm glad they covered some of the lesser-known stories, like the U-2 pilot that got lost. I'm definitely glad they covered the submarine near launch. So much about that whole thing was so close. I'm also glad that they brought up the repercussions of this, including the fact that a lot of people weren't aware of the second part of the deal. So they saw this as a straight up U.S. win, when actually it was kind of a win for both the U.S. and the Soviets. They both kind of got what they wanted in the end. It was Castro who kind of lost out on this. The U.S. got the missiles out of Cuba, and the Soviets got the missiles out of Turkey. But a lot of people weren't aware of that second part at the time. And that misconception that the Americans won, that they forced the Soviet Union to back down completely, does lead to America trying to use its force projection in other areas that doesn't work out quite so well. Anyway, great video. I love this one. This is a topic I've always been really interested in. Read many books on the topic, seen all the movies. I really like how they presented it. And there is more to it than what they cover, but they got most of the really important parts. So hats off to Extra History for this video. And I'd like to thank you all for joining me, and hope to see you back for whatever comes next. Until then, bye-bye.